America, the land of opportunity, the dream that everyone aspires to. But behind the glossy golden vision is a history steeped in violence, exploitation, and systemic racism that many would prefer to forget. On today's Talk Maniac, we are diving into the dark, hidden chapters of U.S. history, uncovering the harsh truths that built the nation, truths that are too often swept under the rug. You've probably heard of slavery and civil rights struggles, but there's so much more that never made it into your history books. Today, we'll break down some of the darkest chapters of U.S. history, the ugly side that shaped the country we know today. When the U.S. was founded, slavery was central to its economy. From the late 1600s through the mid-1800s, African men, women, and children were forced into labor under horrific conditions. They weren't considered people, they were considered property. Enslaved people were essential to agricultural production, especially in the South. Cotton, tobacco, and sugar were the cash crops, and these industries relied on free labor to fuel their growth. Slavery wasn't just a Southern problem. Northern states benefited from slavery too, with their factories processing cotton from the South and their banks financing the trade. But wait, slavery didn't just end with the Civil War, right? Well, no. After the 13th Amendment abolished slavery in 1865, African Americans still faced decades of discrimination, violence, and economic disenfranchisement. Jim Crow laws enforced racial segregation for nearly 100 years. Sharecropping trapped freed Black Americans in a cycle of debt and poverty. And don't get me started on the prison industrial complex. Black Americans are disproportionately incarcerated, especially for crimes related to drugs, a legacy of racial injustice that started right after the Civil War. Now, let's talk about the genocide of Native Americans. From the 1600s to the early 1900s, European settlers and later, the U.S. government systematically wiped out entire indigenous cultures. The goal? To seize land and resources. The Trail of Tears. In the 1830s is one of the most notorious episodes where thousands of Native Americans were forcibly relocated from their ancestral lands, resulting in the deaths of thousands from disease, starvation, and exposure. But it didn't stop there. By the late 1800s, the U.S. government had passed policies that forced Native Americans onto reservations where they had little access to resources, and their cultures were deliberately destroyed. Native American boarding schools were established to erase indigenous cultures and languages. Children were beaten for speaking their native tongues and forced to adopt European customs and Christianity. While settlers stole native lands, the government also orchestrated mass killings like the Wounded Knee Massacre in 1890, where hundreds of Lakota Sioux were gunned down by U.S. troops. It wasn't just African Americans and Native Americans who faced oppression. Throughout the history of the United States, immigrants and minorities were treated as second-class citizens. Irish immigrants, who were largely Catholic, faced widespread hostility in the 1800s. They were depicted as subhuman and were subjected to discrimination and violence. Chinese immigrants weren't much better off. The Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 was a racially motivated law that banned Chinese immigrants from entering the country and denied them citizenship. The land of the free? Only if you're the right color and religion, apparently. Japanese Americans during World War II were forced into internment camps. Over 100,000 Japanese Americans were held without trial, simply because they were seen as enemies due to their ethnicity. The Reconstruction era, from 1865 to 1877, was supposed to be a fresh start after the Civil War. But, well, it was anything but. Freed slaves were given nothing to help them build new lives. No land, no wealth, just promises of equality, which were never fulfilled. The rise of white supremacist organizations like the Ku Klux Klan made life dangerous for Black Americans, particularly in the South. Reconstruction failed because of violence, political resistance, and the rise of a new, insidious form of racial terror. The government failed to protect Black Americans, leaving them vulnerable to exploitation, segregation, and violence for decades to come. So what does all this mean for today? Well, let's just say the ghosts of slavery, genocide, and oppression didn't just disappear overnight. Mass incarceration. African Americans make up 12% of the U.S. population but represent 33% of the prison population. Voting rights. Despite the Voting Rights Act of 1965, voter suppression is still widespread, particularly in black and minority communities. Economic disparity. The average wealth of white families is 10 times that of black families, thanks to centuries of racial inequality. But there's hope. The struggles continue. Movements like Black Lives Matter, the fight for indigenous rights, and immigrant justice remind us that the fight for equality isn't over. The battle for justice is far from over. Every march, every vote, every act of resistance, it's a step toward righting the wrongs of the past. And that's it for today. We just scratched the surface of America's dark history, and trust me, there's a lot more where that came from. If this video made you think or, feel outrage, hit that like button and subscribe for more shocking deep dives. What part of US history shocked you the most? Drop a comment below. And if you've made it this far, comment. History is never easy to let me know you're a real one. This is Talk Maniac, signing off. Keep questioning the past so we can fix the future.